residential technology, lighting specialist, residential
house.
Welcome to Residential Tech Talks. I'm Jeremy Glowacki, Executive Editor of Residential Tech Today. On this week's podcast, Modern Atomics co-founder Michael Braithwaite joins us from Austin, Texas to discuss his 30-plus year career as an innovator and inventor of smart home and commercial AV technology. Mike and I recently reconnected prior to his new company's launch at CEDIA Expo last month in Denver, and that chat was so insightful, I wished afterwards we had recorded it for this podcast. Today, we'll try to recapture some of that magic as we discuss Modern Atomics' first product called Reaktor, which is a power distribution unit designed specifically to save energy while powering motorized shades. We'll also learn how the company plans to use its innovations in other applications going forward and look back on Mike's impressive career leading Crestron's residential systems group in the early 2000s, co-founding NetStreams after that, and innovating with Screen Innovations most recently. Michael Braithwaite, welcome to the podcast. It's great seeing you again. Thanks for joining us today.
Thank you so much, Jeremy. I've big fan. I love your talks here in these podcasts, and of course, over the years, it's been great interacting with you and at the various shows and so forth. So, thank you for inviting me.
Well, it's great to have you, and I know we had spoken, and I wanted to kind of cover, get background on your new venture there. And I always like to kind of get that information when it's something so new. I don't want to do it as a public conversation on a podcast. Then it was over. I'm like, that went really well. And I wish we had just done it as a podcast, but we didn't go into the biographical stuff, and we're going to do that today. But it's been, let's see, we're recording on October 18th, and it's been like a month and a half since CEDIA. Are you still feeling the buzz of having so many accolades and awards from the show?
I don't know that we could have planned the show any better. First of all, thanks to everyone who was at the show that came by our booth. We were busy every day, even Saturday, which is surprising because Saturday is usually like the slow day where everybody's going around looking at their competitors' booths and spying a little bit here and there. But the truth is, there were some folks like yourselves who put out content at the show that said, if you're at CEDIA and you hadn't seen this yet, go back and check it out. So we couldn't believe how many people came back Saturday and said, I was already leaving, but I had to come back because somebody told me. So we feel very thankful, very blessed that we got such a reception. There were a few awards that we got that we wasn't even expecting. We didn't even know on some of them. Some of them we know because there's submissions that you put forth, but there were a few that just came out of the blue. There was one where we'll say it's mentioned less right now, but they told us, they said, so they were looking at one of the products we have called Collider, which is a PoE switch. And they said that was the best product of any category at this entire show. But because we weren't shipping it at the show, they said, we didn't feel good about giving you the best show product of the show when you're not even shipping it yet. And so that, even though that's a left-handed compliment, it was really impressive. And dealers, really responded well. We got tons of great feedback. And so, I don't know how we could have came away any better from that show. We were very fortunate.
Well, I know we're going to dive in deep into this and where the concepts came from and how you felt best to launch and then looking toward the future. But, I don't know who wouldn't know who you are at this point in your career, but let's just look back because it's always fun. I love documentaries on history and things that you kind of get into the weeds about how someone became a success or created this or that. And so let's do it with you because you've hit some high points along the way in the industry that we always talk about on this podcast. And I would say that one of the things I always want to know when I talk to someone was kind of what they were like as a kid, what they were into, and maybe what led you to technology. It looked like early on, like around college time, you might have done some gaming kind of internship stuff there.
Yes.
Were you kind of like that as a kid? Were you into games as a kid? Were you into computers, just taking things apart? What was your childhood like there?
Kind of all the above there. I was heavy into computers. In fact, when I before high school even, I was really into this. I had no money for these, and computers at that time were pretty expensive endeavors. So, I the hack that I did back then was I went to go work for some of those companies, like in the summer. One of my first employers was Sperry Univac, which was like a big computer company at the time, and I mowed their lawn, like
Oh,
was out, you know, and they had a believe me, they had a big lawn. It was like a 5 acre place, and it took forever. But I was underage, so they weren't paying me, but they would let me um, acquire equipment.
Hmm.
So I would get some of the early computer stuff I got because I would go and intern and do stuff, and then I'd get some equipment and bring it home and program it. I loved programming. That was like what I thought I was going to be was a software engineer,
Okay.
and so I kind of started from there. I was early in on telecommunication. This is way before the web, way before So the early communication were along these kind of bulletin board systems and interconnected between universities and stuff, and that's what I really liked, and it got me into there. So that
Y-
was kind of the start, anyways, of it.
Yeah, and so you kind of you take things apart, you build things,
Yes, yes.
and you're involved. Did you have some custom integration connections in the early years?
Well, it's interesting you say that. So, what got me over to the custom integration side was I started getting into audio, believe it or not. And I always loved music. I'm a wannabe musician,
Hmm.
but I can't play a lick.
Okay.
So the problem is, I like music and I like all of that, but not really talented enough to do anything about it. But for some reason, I got really exceptional at building enclosures, speaker designs. Then I started building filter arrangements and line arrays. So one of the first integrators I worked for was a company called Audio Design, and they built super high end residential system, but also some commercial audio distribution systems. And that's kind of what got me into the integration side. Was these guys were selling these high end speakers, and I love the audio side of it. And initially, it was for me building enclosures and building speakers. But what happened is at audio design, they got into home automation. CEDIA was just brand new at the time, and they were getting into this home automation side, and they needed somebody to program their control systems,
Hmm.
and they were doing AMX. And I was like, I was already into computers and software before, so it was kind of a natural thing. So I kind of picked up that, and it started with AMX. And then eventually, I started meeting folks from Crestron,
Hmm.
and the Crestron side kind of brought over, and it took me into a whole, kind of a whole different area on the Crestron side, because now it's brought up the part that I like on the engineering side, on the hardware and developing. And I actually started designing some power supplies. I built a bunch of different devices for that we showed to Crestron, for
Hmm.
example. Back then, this would have been George,
Hmm.
and even Fred was back then,
Sure.
and that kind of turned into kind of a whole different avenue of wow, you could there's a profession here on integrating and doing the controls on these systems. So from that point, then I started incorporating what I knew on the software side and the computer hardware side, and started building these pretty impressive audio distribution systems. And that kind of is what got me in on the integration side, so to speak.
Okay, so audio design. Are you from the Salt Lake area originally?
Yes. So I was born and I was raised in Salt Lake,
Okay.
and that's where I started from. And I know you've talked to several of your episodes. You've talked to people who have businesses out of the Salt Lake area, and it is quite a prolific area. One of our competitors back then was a company called Audition. And some of your previous guests have talked about kind of the competition between the audio design and Audition and all that. And so anyways, those were fun times, and you learn quite a bit on the integration side of you know what goes on to actually do in a building and in a residential environment, of course.
For sure. And then it looks like you got hired by Crestron then, with obviously some of the developments that you were doing there with audio design. Is that how that worked?
Yeah. So from audio design, I actually moved from Salt Lake out to New York and started working at Crestron. And at that time, we built kind of a whole bunch of, it was a whole new development of products. At the time, Crestron was really strong on the corporate side.
And they remain that way. People that are big
For sure.
Crestron on the resi side, Crestron Home obviously is great now, but
That's right.
if you don't really look deep into it, you don't realize they're still primarily commercial, right? They're huge commercial.
That is for sure. But this was a whole new development for them that they call Crestron Home, and that started when I got there. And so I had some relationships with folks because we're doing these big commercial and residential audio distribution systems. There were guys like Morris Kessler, who had a company called ATI, which was building these multi-channel. They were typically high-end amps, like for theaters and so forth. But once I got to Crestron, we kind of put together a whole AV system based on these amplifiers that were built by Morris, and they had Crestron cards inside. So it's kind of a whole new take. This is where the Pad 8 first got developed, and that really took off. That whole category of the distributed audio really went well for Crestron, and that helped launch me, to be honest, because that was kind of the first products that I worked on at Crestron, and it really caught fire and was popular. It's really the predecessor for the digital media, the DM system that came after that.
Yeah.
But that was I really George really believed in me. He was kind of a father figure to me in a lot of ways. There people at Crestron were quite phenomenal. In my development anyways.
That's great. George Feldstein is a legend in this industry, and he's really, a fellow inventor like you. I mean, I'm sure.
Oh,
I don't know what his number of patents on his name were, as a company at least, but it's got to be up there. And well, you're about at 81 now, or climbing?
Yeah, I actually just got my 83rd.
Oh, 83rd. Okay, you need to update your LinkedIn, because that's impressive. I knew you had more, because that was, I think, at the end of last year that you were talking about that. But so you must have been kindred spirits with George there.
George and I got along so well. And it's funny, when I first got to New York, and I didn't have any friends or family that lived there, and I was from the West, and we were looking for a house, and George would say, well, what realtors are you working with, and all this, and I would tell him, and he's like, no. And so he literally, we would get in his plane, and he would take me up and down the Hudson River, and he would point down at these developments like, you don't want to live here, you want to live here, you want to look at a house here. We literally were looking for a house in his plane. Unbelievable situation.
Yeah.
And I really love George. He he was a very big mentor to me. Before I worked at Crestron, we used to go to the CEDIA and Infocom shows,
Mhm.
and we would go around at other booths and kind of look at things and critique things, and it was it was a lot of fun actually. This podcast is pretty short, but there's stories that we have. We were kicked out of Sony's booth before, George and I. We had the statute of limitations gone now, so we can talk about this one.
Yeah.
But there was something we disturbed in Niall's booth one year accidentally. It wasn't on purpose. That Frank Stern probably would not be happy to hear about. And so we had a lot of fun. I think that's the reason he wanted to bring me on board is he we were very kindred spirits. So
and yet you went to work only for a short amount of time with Crestron, it looks like, before you started NetStreams. How was that?
yes.
How did that kind of come along that you went to co-found a brand new company?
Well, okay, so that's that's a fair point. There at that time, so this is in the basically the 2001 time frame. At the time, I really felt strongly that, and of course, I'd been doing networking for at that point for over a decade, for 10 plus years. I felt that everything was going, and I'm not alone, by the way. Lots of people thought this way, but I thought everything would just be encoded and decoded and sent over the network. I mean, I thought it was inevitable that it was going to be like that. And with the success we had in a very short amount of time with the Pad 8 and the CN apps and all that, I kind of presented that idea of this concept. And today in 2024, everybody does AV over IP.
Yeah.
But if you put on your 2000 sneakers on, not everybody, in fact, some of these companies weren't even a company yet, but was thinking along that way. And I thought the next system past the Pad 8 needs to be this totally over the network, digitized, encoded and decoded and synchronized type system. Well, at that time, a lot of people, because this is when people mostly had 10 base T type networks, slow networks. They didn't even have fast Ethernet yet as a standard rule because that was more expensive. So a lot of people thought, well, TCP IP, that's a best effort network. It's not a deterministic network like an analog switch is. And so I kind of had different thoughts about that. I had ideas already about how to synchronize it even on a best effort network. This is before Dante and Audinate and AES 67. This is way before all of that.
Sure.
And so I was hoping that at Crestron we would do that as the next system, like after the Pad 8. Let's say we had kind of a disagreement about that because at the time it's like, okay, who's going to really pay for all this? Who's going to really put that on their network? And again, networks were slow at the time and all that. But I thought I could see in the future that, hey, the networking speeds are going to increase all the time. And codecs, which weren't really available at the time, would be developed over time that would decrease the amount of data that you would need. And so I always thought that. And so because there was no interest, in fact, I was told by George and also at the time Randy Klein, who was the executive VP at that time, they said, why don't you just build another version, a better version of the Pad 8,
right?
A new version of the Pad 8, which they did eventually, but I wasn't interested. I'm like, really? You want to build another analog matrix switch and things like that? And so
you're just moving too quickly for a company.
And so I believed in it so much that I left Crestron. I didn't have a job yet, didn't have anything. I took all my stuff, went back. My wife, we had twin boys that we just bought a house in New York, and so I came home and let my wife know that because she saw I had my box of all my stuff. And she's like, "What's going on?" And I'm like, "Oh, I left Crestron today." And she's like, "Oh, you got a new job?" I'm like, "No, I didn't say I had a new job.
Oh, no.
I just said I left and all this." And she was none too pleased, and I was on the couch for quite a while.
Yeah.
But I really did feel strongly in this, and so strongly I started now writing some patents on the ideas of all this. This kind of takes us fast forward to a gentleman named Herman Cardenas.
Yeah, I was going to ask you when you connected with him, because I know he was pretty important in that
Oh yeah.
NetStreams founding.
Oh yeah. Herman, I met him initially. He was the chairman of the CE Bus Council.
Okay.
I met him because I read all of the CE Bus is just another standard.
Mhm.
It's the EIA 600 standard, and it was actually quite good, especially for its time. It started in 1984. And so it really turned into what you see today now, even with the current matter, like the 1.4 matter. So to take it even to what today, all of the profiles and the clusters and everything, that started from even this original CE bus standard from way back when. Again, it started in 84. And it was initially, it was a standard to standardize IR, but it developed across all the different types of topologies of systems in a structure. So anyways, so I knew quite a bit about it, and I'd met Herman earlier. I called him up and I asked him, I said, and he had this company called Smart, which was in Las Cruces.
Okay.
And they had just did an investment with Microsoft and GE. So it was marketed as GE Smart.
Okay.
And I asked him, I said, would you be interested in doing a new startup to do audio and video over IP?
Mm-hmm.
And he said yes. He was like, absolutely, I'd like to do that. And so I moved down to Las Cruces temporarily. And that's where I met some of the folks that we've been working with through time. Kim Anthony Parker is the CEO at Screen Innovations. He was working there at Smart. This is the first time I met him. It's also the first time I met a guy named Paul Bryson, who's the current CTO at Modern Atomics. And he came to Smart from AMX. So he was kind of a competitor to Crestron at the time, but he left with some other AMX folks to go to Smart. So anyways, I met all those folks down there. We started writing and filing the patents for what would eventually become StreamNet, which is NetStreams protocol. And this is, again, pre-Dante and pre-AES-67 type stuff.
Sure.
And so that's kind of what brought us there. We were trying to determine where we were going to be located because we knew we would be very DSP-centric type products. And so Austin was kind of the one selected because a lot of the audio DSPs and DSPs in general came out of Austin. They had a lot of fabs. And so that's why eventually we picked there. And it took about 6 months before we moved there. And we didn't have the NetStreams name yet. It wasn't really till we got to Austin where we had the NetStreams name. But that's kind of where that started. So it was really myself, Herman Cardenas, who bootstrapped the company for 2 years before eventually we got VC money from Austin Ventures, raised about 40 million in there. But that's where I met Paul Bryson. And so,
and that's great.
And Kim Parker too was there as well. So
yeah, and you're skipping ahead to how you connected to Screen Innovations. I didn't know that connection with Kim, so that's interesting there. Because that seems like a little bit of a zap to end up at a screen company. Even one.
Well, it's funny. It's funny with Kim because I met Kim before Smart because he had a company in Salt Lake. It was technically a little north of Salt Lake. But he used to compete with us on some of these integration and things like that. Then met him again at Smart, and then he joined over on NetStreams. He wasn't one of the founders, but he joined NetStreams in the beginning. So he was there from the very beginning, and then he went his ways. He went to Sonance after NetStreams. And then it is funny, we were at Screen Innovations, and eventually he came on as the new CEO at Screen Innovations. So it's funny, we've worked with Kim like on 3 different occasions. So.
Today's episode is brought to you by the Sonos Era 100 Pro. It's the Sonos solution you've been waiting for. Available in early 2025 exclusively through Sonos partners, Era 100 Pro makes it more efficient and cost-effective to create custom audio setups for your clients. Crafted specifically to meet the needs of both commercial and residential installations, Era 100 Pro offers the same sleek design and acoustic architecture as Era 100 with a range of added hardware and software solutions to streamline your projects. With Era 100 Pro, you can configure more unique setups in new locations with PoE+. Era 100 Pro also provides secure installation, built-in theft deterrence, and multiple options for cable management with pro-grade mounts. And the new Zones capability in the Sonos app gives Era 100 Pro users easier control of their system. Era 100 Pro is the first product exclusive through the Sonos network of trusted partners. Find out more information at sonos.com. What would you say? I looked back and researched a little bit more about NetStreams just to refresh my memory. Something that was just so ubiquitous at the time that it was, a major brand. It kind of gone to the recesses of my memory, so I needed to kind of hit some of the old articles. And interestingly enough, one of them was my old magazine, Residential Systems, and there was a great profile there, and it gave some of that history you just provided. But then talks about the Musica product line,
Yes.
which is the whole house, 4 sources to 6 rooms simultaneously. And then they were talking about the speaker products that were being developed as well, which is interesting. Not just distribution, but actual, the pieces at the end there playing the music. So,
well, and we licensed. So we had, based on the StreamNet protocol, we actually did licensing with several speaker companies. There were a few that commercialized the product and brought them out. Like Polk Audio was one of them.
Okay,
they were the first ones that actually brought commercialized products out, and they had the first. And again, this is before Sonos and before a lot of these other speakers that were out on the market. Really fantastic. If you ever heard like an LC 265 IP Polk speaker, that's a fantastic speaker. I mean, really good. Mostly because of, Polk did a great job on the actual speakers themselves, the producing of the speakers, but the ability at that time to keep the signal digitally the entire way to the speaker, and then do all the filter arrangements inside the speaker. So we produced an amplifier that they put with the speakers that was in there, and so it was a very good product. It was a little ahead of its time. But as far as like people who have heard them and stuff, it still stands today. Anybody's speaker that's out there right now. So.
Well, how far did you take it before NetStreams was then acquired? Because that was a big part of the story as well.
Well, what happened to a lot of the CEDIA companies and residential dealers at the end of 2008 when the financial crisis hit. We were in a heavy, so we were working on our IP video and our multi-channel distribution products at that point. So in September of 2008, we had our best revenue month ever. We had a $30 million pipeline of projects. And that's right after that September is when that's when Bear Stearns and Lehman Brothers, that's when the whole financial crisis hit. So our whole pipeline got crushed at that point. Most of those projects were either delayed or canceled altogether, and it hurt a lot. And since we were in heavy development, we had 65 people at that point. We were doing this heavy digital video, and multi-channel audio versions of those products. We had to do reductions in force, and basically the company Austin Ventures, who put in most of the money for our, which was our VCs don't hang around for many years. And now we're getting towards the again, we're at a point where the projects were delayed. A lot of the CD dealers and were canceling all of those, or even having problems themselves. So we fell into the perfect storm, because at that point the VC was like, okay, find somebody to acquire you, otherwise we're going to shut the doors down. Wow. So we were in a pretty kind of a bad situation at that point. So in 2009, we were acquired from a company called Clear One out of Salt Lake also. And they, I thought that they saw a lot of value in the products that we had produced, but it turns out the big thing that they were kind of interested in is we had quite a lot of patents
Hmm.
built up at that time. So we had more patents than what they had when they acquired us, and so that did save us from doom because we didn't have the $40 million to pay back to the VCs, and we were able to, keep the products going. The big problem is they really didn't invest in future development, and so we kind of was we finished the last digital video and a few of the things we were working on, but we had to cut the teams back, and we really weren't able to continue that progress. I stayed on. They let a lot of the original NetStreams folks go, but I had stayed on there for quite some time. I was their chief strategy officer and did a lot of other things with them. And I didn't leave until 2018. And that's when I made my way over to Ryan Gustafson and Shannon Gustafson's company by one of our Blake Vacker, who was
Yeah.
I'd known for a long time, even back when he was with D Tools, and that's where I first met him.
Okay.
And he had kind of noticed that I wasn't with Clear One anymore, and got kind of us together with the owners of Screen Innovations.
I felt like that toward the end there with Clear One, you were mostly going toward that Infocom side where it was mostly
It
business
was mostly
solutions.
commercial.
Yeah,
That's
commercial.
correct.
Yeah, so
Because Clear One is mostly a commercial. They don't really work on the residential side. So actually, yeah, I'd been kind of away from the CEDIA side for. We'd still been going to the shows, but
Mhm.
we didn't have the same emphasis on it.
Yeah, there was always that crossover opportunity, but it was
Right.
definitely not as as core to the CEDIA kind of show as it would have been in the early days. And then
Right.
so you get an opportunity through connections there with Screen Innovations, and we don't have to go too far down
Right.
the rabbit hole with your career path, because I definitely want to get to the new stuff. But what were you some of the things you were proud of? Because they do kind of lead to where you are right now, because it is
Absolutely.
the first product is related to motorized screens. So what were some of the developments there? Because you don't think of screens as a place where you would definitely be coming up with really innovative stuff, even as important as it is to the industry right now.
Sure. Well, I mean, what we saw is they had just got into the shade part of the business. They've been doing projection screen and Screen Innovations. Ryan started that in 2003, and they were primarily doing projection screens and fixed screens. And I think a year before we got there, they had just entered the shade type market, and they were and really amazing product, looked great, installed fast, like beautiful product, really really top notch what they've been working on. There was a guy there named Tom Cooley. He was their COO. uh, I kid Tom all the time that he has forgotten more about shading than I'll ever know. The guy's been doing shades in the shade business for 40 years, and so really cool stuff. But what we noticed was they were basically buying all of the, like, of course, they were buying the motors going in the shades from a company called Somfy,
Sure.
but they were also buying all the peripheral, the accessories, power supply, all of that kind of stuff. And so that's kind of where we noticed that, hey, there was a place there where we could make some innovations, some improvements, and we started building and eventually we built a whole ecosystem that SI is still selling today, and that they're working on. Before we went to SI, one last little side note: Paul Bryson, who was one of the founders of NetStreams with me and Herman, um, he came up with this name of a company called Modern Atomics, and he wanted me to start it then in 2018. I was scared. I didn't have, the financial ability to do it, and I was like worried about it, and so once working with the owners of SI, I saw how passionate they were about that, and there was really some interesting things that we could do there. And the Screen Innovation is a wonderful place and good people there, and so um, I was too scared to pull the trigger on that. So instead, I asked Paul to come and work at Screen Innovations, and this is where we built a bunch of stuff. Now, at the end of building kind of a whole ecosystem for SI, this is last year, like 2023. We kind of said, we've done what we set out to do here, and now I was ready. I wasn't scared anymore. And I told Paul, I said, okay, I'm ready to start that modern atomics that you wanted to start, back in 2018. And so we wrapped up the last couple things. We worked on a product called Pegasus and one called Jewel. Was the last kind of items we worked on at SI. And then this year in January 2024, we formed this new company in Austin called Modern Atomics. And believe me, we have all kinds of things that we're working on.
Yeah, I remember you talking about all the things. This is just the beginning now, right?
Oh yeah, there is all kinds of stuff. If you've ever looked at an iceberg out in the ocean, you only see this little tip sticking out of the water.
I've never heard that metaphor before. Where'd you come up with that one?
It just makes a lot of sense because you're totally like, oh, it's this little tiny piece. But if you look under the water, there's this huge iceberg that's underneath the water. That is what people don't see right now. We identified some pain points and some things that are like, so today in 2024, there's huge mega trends that are happening for sustainability, lowering energy. You see it on everything. Like, chip makers are making chips that take up less power. Everything is doing this. And we looked at all the power supplies since we were building all this equipment, especially on the SI side where we're looking at all these shades. And we're like, all the power supplies that are being sold in this market are like from the 80s. Right. They're all older type system. In fact, most of them, I'd say all of them, with a few exceptions in our industry, they're off-the-shelf power supplies that they buy from somebody else, a power supply vendor.
There's no innovation there forever, is basically
exactly no innovation because there's no requirements. Okay. There's no requirements to save energy. There's no requirements to reduce the electrostatic discharge. So shades have a DC motor that's inside, and it's quite a lot different than like if you're powering an LED light strip. An LED light strip has a certain profile when you turn it on and turn it off, whereas a DC motor has a huge inrush of current, and then around the motor you have a tube, and around that tube you have fabric, and that's rubbing against each other all the time, and it's creating all this electrostatic discharge. And the other big problem is the motors are on 24/7. They're on all the time because people have to send commands to them. And so we had this idea of, what if we made a power supply and we eliminate the power altogether? So there's no power. Because, for example, if anyone listening to this podcast, if you've had motorized shades, or even if you don't have motorized shades, just think about it for a second. How often do you go to the window and adjust your shades? How many times a day? Is that 1 time a day, 2 times a day, 4 times a day? So we've asked this hundreds and hundreds of times over the industry, over lots of people. And the average is about 4 times, 3 to 4 times. Okay. And then what we usually say is, how long does it take a motorized shade to get from the upper limit to the lower limit? What is that time? The average is about 30 seconds because some shades are bigger than others and some are faster and some are smaller. But if you average it, so that 4 times a day times 30 seconds, that's 2 minutes in one 24-hour period. What are these off-the-shelf power supplies and these shade motors doing for the 23 hours and 58 minutes of the day that they're not moving? And if you go touch the power supplies, you'll see exactly what they're doing. They're generating all this heat. So we have a term for this. We call this an operational quiescent current issue, meaning there's no load on this, but there's a huge power supply that can do the inrush current of these big motors. And so we identified that as a pain point where we said we could build a power supply that could do this huge amount of current, but yet not waste all this energy all the time. And since then, we've joined several initiatives. Global initiatives. We're on 2 different Save AV committees. We're on the Second Life Save AV, and we're on the Audio Video Design Committee. And so our idea is we can reduce or eliminate. In fact, if you have a solar panel on your house, we can eliminate all the power being used for your shades. And in a big commercial building, if you have 400 or 500 shades, that's a significant amount of energy that's going. And that was kind of the genesis for this first product called Reaktor. And we've had really good feedback from people. People love the idea, and there's some deployments that are already starting, and we've just started our second production on that. And we have a whole series of different power supply, because shades is just one application, but we have a few other products in the AV world that can benefit from a very similar type of power structure.
Well, I know we went in our prior call went into great detail on this, but you did give me a sense of how it worked in a short amount of explanation. And basically it's like acknowledging it's kind of keeping it awake in a way, if I'm saying it in the most simplistic way. There's like a way that the system is acknowledging that it doesn't have to be phantom power this whole time, but it's
right,
kind of keeping
right.
it's like pinging it almost like it's there.
Well, yes, in a way. So the reason why they stay on all the time, and what we're talking about is larger motors, because the smaller motors, most of them have been converted to kind of lithium batteries, and they put those in the shades and then they connect those up. But the lithium battery type shades, they can only go so much torque. I think 3 Newton meters, the biggest one we've seen that has like a little lithium battery in it. And so, and that's fine for a small window, but if you get to a bigger window or a large commercial window, it's too small of a motor. So the bigger motors, they are either AC or they're DC, like low voltage type. And so in those scenarios, they have to keep them on, because frankly, they didn't have requirements. And again, all of these power systems were designed quite a long time ago. If they were designing them right now, they do more along the lines of kind of what we're doing. And so we just thought, hey, we have something that we can hit that will right away save energy, which saves on the consumption, both on the end user, but it also saves in other ways too. I don't need electricians. Like our devices, like this is a Reaktor, for example. And the one thing that you'll see on it is there is no AC input. So there's no connection to that. So inside of all of our power supplies, we have an energy storage module.
Okay.
And we harvest energy. So the energy, if you really want to be green, you would put like a solar panel. If you have a Tesla solar roof, you would take one of their tiles, and we have a cute little adapter. You would plug in the solar tile to that adapter and plug it into one of our RJ45s. If you don't have a solar panel, we understand not everybody has solar panels. We do give like a passive PoE injector that you can use the same way.
Okay.
But those injectors are tiny, take only a few watts of power, versus all of these shades, hundreds of shades that are plugged into either AC or, if they're low voltage, onto big power supplies. So
right. Okay. So looking ahead, what are other areas that could benefit, or other categories that could benefit from the technology?
Well, okay, so those kinds of products within an AV space that have similar duty cycles to shades. So there are other devices that can do the same thing. But I will tell you one that'll probably surprise some people is the new direct view, like micro LED. So on micro LED, I don't know if you've seen one or seen them install one. You can see all the power supplies they use.
Yeah.
And micro LED has a similar thing, kind of like shades do, where I might have to put up white on all of the LEDs. And that's the biggest current draw.
Sure.
So if I have to put up white on every single LED, it's a huge amount of current that I have to come up with. So I have to spec big enough power supplies so that if any time every pixel needs to be white, I can put it up. Well, the problem is you're not watching a movie and it's every pixel is white all the time. Usually they're dark scenes, or you'll have some combination, but it's never going to be that. And so, but you still have to have a power supply big enough that it can do that if it needs to, just like shades. There's such an inrush on all the DC motors. You have to have a power supply that can do all this current. So anyways, we are partnered with a couple of these manufacturers, and we're building similar Reaktors for them, where it can provide that peak power when you need it. But for most of the time, it's a much greater or less energy consumption.
That's
And
interesting.
again, if you have some sort of renewable on it,
Yeah.
like a solar panel, in theory, you'd have no power going to the video wall, which is not the case. Go look at video walls right now and see how many power supplies and see how much power they're taking right now.
Yeah, as a matter of fact, I just attended a session at the HTSA conference where they were talking specifically. Sony and some other companies were there, and talking about working with the electrician when those things are getting installed and making sure you have enough circuits dedicated to those
That's
big
correct.
walls, because they're taking so much power to run that
Yes.
it's not being considered. It's not just like plugging in a LCD TV anymore.
Yeah. And so what I think you're going to see is this will be a continuous process that initially they don't have the requirement for saving the energy, because on the micro LED they're just trying to get the brightest, cool, best looking picture that you can get, and they're not as concerned about how much the power that's going to take. Well, again, in the year 2024, it's a different world today.
Yeah.
There are so the UN has a whole sustainability goal, and they have different goals. And in the AV industry, there are several that we directly can contribute to. So energy consumption is one, but then it goes past that, like how it's produced. Like Reaktor is a good example. We built it from the ground up as a sustainability product. There are no conflict minerals of any kind. There's no cobalt. There's no mercury. There's no dangerous chemicals in there. We give a 10-year warranty on our products. Our product is really built to last 20 years. And so it's if you go look at some of the other products that are on the marketplace, you'll see that they may have a 90-day or a 1 year or a 2 year, and they have no plans for how the end of life, when it's done, where do you put these giant power supplies that nobody will use anymore? Because think about how the electricity pricing just in the last 5-10 years, what the per kilowatt cost is. One of the reasons at the show, we had a lot of people that said, how come there's an amp meter that's on the front of your products?
Okay.
Well, the reason we do that is we know that nobody's talking about this, that people don't even know that their products are taking all that. That amp meter, as soon as I plug in the shades, you can see how much energy you're wasting in real time. And again, if you multiply that every day throughout a whole year, it's huge. You're talking about hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of kilowatt hours wasted just for the thing sitting there.
Yeah.
Now, back to your initial assertion about, well, okay, why did they leave them on the others? Well, they don't know when you're going to go to Josh and say, hey, Josh, raise the shades.
Yeah.
They don't know when you're going to do that. So they have to leave those on. In our case, the reason we can eliminate that is we literally remove the power from all the motors. If you go up to with a multimeter and you measure at the shade, you'll see there's 0 volts there, no volts there. The other thing is, by the way, what fails in DC motors, inside the motor, there are electrolytic caps. Those caps fail, and they use good caps, Lutron, Somfy, all of these companies that build these motors, they do a great job. In fact, Somfy has their own initiative for sustainability called Act for Green. But what fails on these motors is the electrolytic caps. They're inside of a tube. There's no air flowing through the tube. So as the temperature rises on the board, and they have power regulators in there and inductors, things that generate heat, and there's nowhere for that heat to go. So the caps, they dry out. So you actually are reducing the time for most of these motors. Most of these motors can only last about 15 years powered up 24/7 like that. If you remove the power from them like we do, you will actually extend the life of those motors, besides saving all the power and everything else. Now, how do we turn it on when you say, hey, Josh? So we see those commands, because remember, all of those motors are plugged into right here.
Yeah.
So as soon as we see those commands, within milliseconds, we've already ramped the power back up and allowed the command to go through. So you don't even see that there is a delay there, by the way, and depends on the motor, but it's anywhere from 20 to 40 milliseconds of a delay for that to happen. But the shade moves. You don't know that we were in the middle unless you had a scope on it. You'd see now, hey, we have this little delay in there. But it might be worth it to save the whole planet for just that one little thing. And by the way, even on our power supplies, you can turn off that eco mode if you really don't want that little bit of delay. Now you won't save as much power because the motor is on all the time. But
well, it sounds like it is something that is beneficial to the motorized screen manufacturers for sure from a longevity standpoint. And obviously those who purchase the products and want things to last, especially infrastructure type products like a motorized screen would shade would be, as opposed to things that are
That's
kind
correct.
of unfortunately thought of as disposable electronics that we have to deal with. New TVs come along and you want the latest model, but something like the way your windows are designed and treated, hopefully you're going to want to keep those things for many, many years. But
That's true.
the environmental aspect to this, which is so important to me, and there are those of us out there that this is an important story. I really respect that this is a focus for you, and you understand how we
For
need to
sure.
start turning the corner on this, and as well as the waste part of it, which you don't get nearly enough action on that from the industry. Maybe on the packaging, that's getting better a little bit, but
You're starting to see it. And there's companies that are putting big focus on this. If you go, for example, to saveav.org, you'll see that there is even what you just said about, hey, I want to go to a bigger display or a different type of display.
yeah.
There's a whole committee that we're in that's called the Second Life. And what that is designed to do is, instead of throwing that away, there are other organizations or there are others that can use that technology that our whole industry is installing in another way, for other organizations or other opportunities where maybe they didn't have the budgets to do the latest and all that. And so there are definitely ways to help and all that. And so and we feel pretty strongly about it. So
well, that's great. And I know that we could probably go a lot down the road for the future things, but maybe just hit on the product you mentioned earlier on that couldn't get the award because it wasn't shipping yet.
yes,
and what you've got going on there.
So there is a new product that is called Collider, and it's really for what we had been talking about up until now was a product called Reaktor, and that's really for low voltage type motors. Collider is specific to PoE motors.
Okay.
So as PoE motors, you may have seen Somfy release 3 new motors at the show. They won several product awards for their 3 new PoE motors. They're fantastic motors. We've tested them. We use them. They're really good. So Collider does the same thing as Reaktor. There is no AC power. It's the only PoE switch on the whole CEDIA floor that had no AC input, no fans, no anything. It had 24 ports. It can do all 24 ports at the full 90 watt. It is a real BT switch. And that's what got some attention because people are looking at this and saying, you have a PoE switch, but there's no power into it. Again, it has the same energy storage module that the Reaktor has. It harvests from either panels or passive PoE, or you can even take off of one of the PoEs to power it. So there's lots of ways that Collider can help in projects. One of the big ones, though, is you don't need to know anything about networking. It is really just a power supply.
Okay.
So in most PoE switches, you're going to have to, there's setup involved. You're going to configure them. You're going to do different things. This was really designed for shades so that you can just take any of those new shade PoE motors from multiple brands, plug them in. Everything that they need is already built into the switch. This is, we've been building PoE switches since back in the NetStreams times, and this is the latest version of that. It's just super efficient. Again, can do 90 watts on all ports concurrently. It's a half rack. So in one RU, you can do 48 ports, no AC power. And that's kind of got a lot of attention because people were looking at that in applications where maybe they don't have AC or they don't have things like that. So.
Well, this is all so exciting, and I can't wait to continue to watch the developments because I know, like you said, that tip of the iceberg thing, all the ideas that are still percolating and lining up behind these. So we'll continue to watch, and congrats on the start. It's a good one, and such a unique little niche, but something so important to, the earth, honestly, and all the things that are put into homes by the folks in our industry. And if you can start to kind of, reduce the impact on the
Absolutely.
climate, as you go, that's even better. So thank you for this, and congratulations on such a successful launch, Michael. It's really great talking to you.
Thank you for inviting us, and definitely anybody who's interested, come by our site at modernatomics.com. We'd love to talk with you. We'd love to earn your business, and let us know about your project, and stay tuned. Stay tuned.
Absolutely.
We're not just a power supply company. Stay tuned to what.
Okay. Yes. We won't give away any secrets yet. We'll just wait to be excited as they come along. But we're definitely going to watch this space very closely now with you. And I'm intrigued by your title. One last thing, your Chief Biological Officer. Tell me about that.
Well, we like to have fun. So our name, you already notice our names and the names of products and things
industrial
like that.
Design and logos and things that are so cool.
Yeah, we like to have a lot of fun, and we put things where the installer needs them. So all of the pinout information is on the bottom of the unit.
Right.
There's QR codes to get right to the manual. My personal phone number and email is on the back. So if you have any problems, definitely get a hold of us. We do have 24/7, 365 support. But if you are having issues, it's not a bad idea to come and complain to one of the founders, and I'll definitely be able to help you. The biological officer, because what we do, our processors inside are the latest generation of the ST, what they call Edge AI processors. And so we kind of played with that term. Instead of saying something like Chief Executive Officer, like, hey, we're Chief Biological. By the way, Tim Marshall, one of the other founders, he's our Chief Power Officer. I technically think that's a cooler title than the Biological Officer.
Yeah.
And he's kind of our CFO. And I guess he has the power of the purse, so maybe the Power Officer is the better one for him. And then Paul Bryson's our Chief Technology Officer. And so we like to, even though we're serious and we're about sustainability, we do like to have fun.
Yeah.
And we do like to get, the right information where it needs. So
awesome. That's so fun. I love it. Well, thanks again, Mike. Really great talking to you.
Thank you so much.
Michael Braithwaite is Chief Biological Officer, Chairman of the Board, and co-founder of Modern Atomics. And like you said, you can learn more about Modern Atomics at modernatomics.com. And that wraps up today's show, which was produced by Residential Tech Today, IPW, and Pretty Easy Podcast. If you're new to Residential Tech Talks, please subscribe to the podcast where you watched or listened to this episode. Also, check out all the latest residential tech news at our magazine's website, restechtoday.com, where you can also subscribe to the print or digital magazine and to our Tuesday and Thursday email newsletters. Until next time, please stay safe, stay inspired, and let us know if you have a great story to tell.
Residential Tech Talk, inventors, lighting specialists, residential tech.
Home automation, smart device, home or smart house.